Welcome to Books and Bridges, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, a public humanities institute of ideas and conversation, and we explore the wisdoms of the world and apply them to modern life. Thank you for being here tonight. Tonight we will delve into what many people call Shakespeare's supreme achievement, which is the play King Lear. And it takes place against a vast panoramic backdrop of tragedy and suffering. But in that backdrop, we see glimpses of redeeming love and affection. And our gracious scholar and host tonight, Mark Matheson, will be conducting this lecture. Let me just read you his bio. In fact, let me just say that this is the fifth time that Mark has been gracious enough to attend and to teach at Books and Bridges. Mark Matheson has taught English at the University of Utah for 20 years, over 20 years. A native Utahn, he received his master's degree from the University of Utah and his doctorate from the University of Oxford. Professor Matheson travels to London with his students where he teaches seminars in British literature. He also serves as the director of the University of Utah-based Tanner Lectures on Human Values. He greatly enjoys advocating for students' educational interest through the Muse Project. And this past year and a half, he's been itching to get back to England. So Mark, I turn the time over to you. We will be all ears. Thanks for coming.
Well, Nathan, thank you so much. And thank you for yet another kind invitation. I always have such a wonderful evening with Books and Bridges. It's a great group of people. I'm honored to know many of you. And I'm just very excited to talk with you tonight about King Lear. And I think that Nathan set this talk up very, very well. It's a very, very dark play. And yet I think it might really be Shakespeare's greatest achievement, as critics in the past have thought too. Not necessarily his greatest play, but his greatest achievement. And I think of this because I think that the poetic conception with which Shakespeare invests the play, particularly in terms of his representation of unconditional love, is simply extraordinary. And even if the manifestation of this love in the world of the drama doesn't change that world in its entirety or avert horrific loss at the end of the play. Nevertheless, I think this is a very hard-won vision of Shakespeare's about how human love can rise above the traumas of our individual lives and of our social and political lives. And I think this play is a kind of lasting testament to the reality of unconditional love in our lives, however difficult that is to achieve, and how transformative the experience of such love is. And we're going to focus tonight. There's so many things that we could talk about in King Lear. We're going to focus on the relationship between Lear and his youngest daughter, Cordelia. They appear only in 3 scenes together, the first and the last scene, and the last scene of Act 4. So through the great breadth of the play, they do not meet. And their reunion in Act 4, scene 7, is a really ineffably beautiful moment in which I think Lear's spiritual transformation over the course of the play is made absolutely evident. And so what I'd like to do is just go through the play, talk quite a bit about the first scene, and then jump across that great gap in the middle and talk about Act 4, Scene 7, the scene of reunion between Lear and Cordelia, and then the final scene. So you'll recall that in the first explosive scene of the play, Lear announces to his royal court that he will divide his kingdom into three, and he will give a third of the kingdom to each of his three daughters. He does this, he says, to unburden himself as he gets nearer to death. He's already past 80 years of age. But though he is giving away rule, as he says, political power and cares of state to the younger generation, he intends to hold on to what he calls the name and all the addition of a king, meaning his many titles and the deference from others that he will go on requiring even after he gives up his royal power. He expects his daughters to take care of him by turns into the future and to support his retinue of 100 knights. Well, as you also remember, no doubt, Lear has arranged a very public test of love that each of his daughters must pass if she wants the land and the wealth that he offers. He says, and these are his words, "Which of you shall we say doth love us most?" And, he speaks with the royal we, speaking about himself in the plural as we, as a habit of a lifetime. And he's a very masterful and commanding character in this first scene. Well, it's really a quite childish piece of court theater that he has devised here in the love test. But his older daughters, Goneril and Regan, give him exactly what he wants, very inflated and flattering praise for him and expressions of their love for him, and each receives in turn a third of the kingdom. And then he comes to his youngest daughter, Cordelia. And one senses that this whole charade has been devised by Lear very specifically for this moment when Cordelia will presumably speak out in the open court in this very public space, how much she loves her father, the king. And he addresses her at this point by saying, "Now, our joy, what can you say to draw a third more opulent than your sisters?" And to this command, Cordelia is silent. And I want to think with you for a moment about what her silence signifies. And I think the dramatic context is decisive here for our understanding of that. She refuses to respond to her father as he would have her do in this contrived piece of political theater, also very much a psychological and emotional kind of theatrical moment for Lear himself and for Cordelia. She refuses to use what she will later call the glib and oily art of her older sisters, who are very adept at flattering Lear and telling him what he wants to hear. I also think she won't do what Lear wants here because the love of her father is the truth of her being. And it's too holy for her to be spoken of in a context that has been corrupted, frankly, by her sister's self-serving lies. I would also say that her silence is indicative of her great personal strength and moral and emotional and spiritual independence. She manifests, I think, extraordinary independence in successfully resisting this socially prescribed script and situation that Lear has created for her. And she will not adopt that language that he has prescribed for herself. She will not take it as and accept it as her own. And I think, in a kind of general summing up, her silence signifies her love for her father, it's a testament to that love and its reality and its truth. And the critic Anne Pasternak Slater has brilliantly identified Cordelia's silence in this moment of King Lear as not only remarkable in itself, but also as the still center of the Shakespearean universe, an absolute at the heart of the great multiplicity and ceaseless movement within Shakespeare's imaginative work and vision as a whole. So Cordelia declares her love in her silence, and she protects that love from the falsity of the scene Lear and the two older daughters have created. So is her nothing a declaration of her love. That's the first word she speaks to Lear. A one-word response to that command that she say something that will enable her to get a more opulent third than her sister. She simply cannot speak of her love in that context. But Lear hears her silence and her nothing in another way. He hears it as evidence that she does not love him. And many readers have asked at this point, and I do think all the time we're spending here on the first scene is, and we're going to spend more, is very justified. It's the scene that generates the action of the entire play. And many readers have asked, well, why couldn't Cordelia, who really does love her father, come up with some kind of compromise here in which she could both preserve the integrity of her love, but give Lear just enough of what he wants that he would be placated. And in this case, she knows what her sisters are about. And if she does this, she can protect Lear and take care of him for the rest of her life and his life, for the rest of his life, more pointedly. And this was Lear's plan. He says later, after the eruption and division between them, that I thought to set my rest on her kind nursery. His plan was to live with her full time after the division of the kingdom. But Cordelia is not interested in a pragmatic response of that kind, and it doesn't even seem to enter her mind as a possibility. She offers Lear only a direct confrontation with her radical love for him, which in this moment he simply can't see. And in the face of this, what he regards as her rejection and her failure to love him, in response to this, he makes a tragic error. This is Aristotle's hamartia, the tragic error committed by the protagonist. And from this point, the descent and suffering of the tragic protagonist in Lear's experience is set in motion. Cordelia might not fully understand exactly what she's doing in standing unalterably for her own love, but Shakespeare knows, and she is confronting him, as she says in Shakespeare's text, with the truth of her bond with him. I love you according to my bond, nor more nor less. She's not going to quantify her love. She's not going to inflate it in terms of flattery, as her sisters have done. She says, I do love you, and I love you according to my bond. And that's a very important line in establishing the Shakespearean understanding of love that emerges both in this play and in Shakespeare's other work. The word bond for her relationship with her father is hers, and it establishes her irreducible distance from her sisters. She says, as I mentioned, I love your majesty according to my bond. And it's as though she's saying, I do not give my love in return for something else. My love is not transactional, which is a word I've heard young people using recently. It's not something I withhold and then give as a kind of quid pro quo for something that is given to me. It simply is, and it is unconditional, and it is unchanging. That's the remarkable thing that Cordelia does in the first scene. Well, as I'm sure you're all familiar with the play, that Lear's response to Cordelia's refusal to give him what he wants is probably the greatest tantrum in world drama. One consistent feature of tragedy, and I'm enjoying talking about the genre a little bit with you, is self-division within the tragic protagonist. The tragic protagonist is not, when he or she commits the tragic error, a whole person. The protagonist is a very divided person. And I think Lear manifests this division fundamentally. He bears within himself a dialectic of ego on the one hand and his capacity for love on the other hand. What the great artist William Blake identified as the perpetual conflict within ourselves between what he called, and he capitalizes these terms, the selfhood and the imagination. For Blake, the selfhood is our ego, an identity constituted by money, social status, and institutional rank, and the deference that these things bring to us from other people. Imagination, by contrast, for Blake, is ceaseless love and creativity and empathy. It is the antithesis of narcissism. It is, Blake says, the vine of eternity, and which runs through all of us as human beings across all space and time. And that communion that we can have by magnifying, helping this vine of eternity to flourish amongst us, is a great transformative power. The selfhood is barren. The imagination is fruitful and creative and exuberant. I keep going back to Blake's terms in my own experience. I think it's an amazing understanding, simple and astonishingly powerful, that we are all, as human beings, living, breathing human beings, we're all, negotiating this dialectic within ourselves between our kind of, inherent egocentrism and selfishness on the one hand, and our empathy and self-giving and imaginative understanding of other people's experiences and our love on the other hand. I think it's powerful. I think it explains a lot, or illuminates, let me say. Explains is not the right word. Illuminates a great deal of Shakespearean tragedy. Well, now in his eruption against Cordelia in the plays for Esteem, Lear is acting, if we're going to use Blake's terms, entirely out of his selfhood. It overwhelms and obscures completely his potential for love. He believes he is fully justified in disowning and banishing Cordelia. And this is the hamartia, or wrong action, that Aristotle identifies as what generates tragic experience for the protagonist. In this case, Lear believes in the moment of his banishing of Cordelia that his actions are fully justified. The tragic recognition, or anagnoresis, as Aristotle calls it, comes in tragedy when the protagonist recognizes that what seemed to be an absolutely correct action in the moment is revealed to have been appallingly wrong. So we essentially see Lear in his masterful selfhood in the first scene, though he addresses Cordelia as our joy, my joy, which gives us a hint that, selfhood isn't the whole story, where Lear is concerned as Shakespeare conceives and represents this character. Actually, about Lear's capacity for love and imagination, even the undeveloped abundance of this capacity, which I'm going to argue we see by the end of the play, I don't think there can be any doubt about that. Even before the end of the first act, in Act 1, Scene 5, there's evidence for this. In his dialogue with the fool in that act, he's talking with another character, but he's also halfway paying attention to that conversation and is also deeply engaged in his own thinking and feeling and his own kind of moral self-evaluation. And he says in the course of that short scene, apropos of nothing, it doesn't relate to the conversation he's having with the fool at all. His has one line, 4 words: I did her wrong. I think that here, still early in the play, we have clear evidence of Lear's tragic recognition, and that recognition will work itself out through the rest of the drama. And so from the start, I want us to keep in mind the multidimensionality of Lear as a character, his real potential for unpredictable growth and transformation through love and imaginative experience, even if we barely see his capacity for that in the first scene. And there's also in the first scene the matter of Cordelia's marriage. The suitors for her hand have long in Lear's court made their amorous sojourn, as Lear says. They've been there a long time. And the 2 suitors are the Duke of Burgundy and the King of France. And after Lear's disowning of Cordelia and his banishing of Kent, this matter of nuptial business has to be resolved. And I think it's interesting that in the division between them and what they represent, the 2 suitors represent this kind of distinction between selfhood and imagination, imaginative love within Lear himself. Burgundy is driven by his acquisitiveness for wealth and power, and France is somehow able to move beyond the issue of Cordelia's dowry, which Lear has now stripped from her, and to perceive and understand Cordelia as a mysteriously exceptional young woman. Burgundy refuses the marriage when Lear tells him that a dowry is now out of the question. And he actually speaks of Cordelia in this debased way, which he does in the second half of the first scene. He speaks of her in terms of commodification here. He says to Burgundy, well, she did have a large dowry at one time, but now since I have disowned her, and these are his words, her price is fallen. Her value. You're not going to get along with her the dowry that I was once offering. Now, as Lear and Burgundy have this exchange, I think the King of France can't quite believe what he's hearing. And he gives Burgundy one more chance. For some reason, Burgundy seems to have the precedence here. And he says, my Lord of Burgundy, what say you to the lady? Love's not love when it's mingled with regards that stand aloof from the entire point. Will you have her? She is herself a dowry. And the world of Lear and Burgundy can simply not comprehend such a statement. But what a great 5-word sentence. Sometimes Shakespeare's power is in his brevity, in the brevity of things people say, characters say that kind of reorder the world. And I think she is herself a dowry, is one of those brief, plain, powerful statements. Burgundy asks Lear to restore the dowry, but Lear refuses. And Burgundy is no longer a suitor. And he says to Cordelia, turns to her and says, I am sorry then you have so lost a father that you must lose a husband. And Cordelia's reply is amazing. She says, peace be with Burgundy. And I think she's as genuine as she can possibly be in wishing him well. But then she goes on, since that respects of fortune are his love, meaning power and wealth and status. This is what is going to determine his choice in marriage. Since that respects of fortune are his love, I shall not be his wife. This is an unanswerable remark. And in fact, and I just noticed it, preparing these remarks, we never hear from Burgundy again. His rather bad faith remark to Cordelia is the last word he has in the play. I think her speech is a brilliant summing up of Burgundy as a man. And I think it's especially moving because she doesn't address him in the second person. She will not grant him that intimacy. She doesn't say you and I. She speaks to him as a third person and says, and I think distances him from her forever she does this by that grammatical choice. She keeps and defines her own distance from him. And then she protects her her potential for romantic love by this verbal distancing. I think recalls her similar protection of her filial love from the fallen context of the court established by Lear and her older sisters. And I just come away from this 3-line speech from Cordelia thinking, what an extraordinarily formidable young woman she is. France is still a suitor. And he immediately follows, this tremendous rejection of Burgundy and summing up of his character that we get from Cordelia with these lines. Fairest Cordelia, that art most rich being poor, thee and thy virtues I seize upon. Gods, and we're in a pre-Christian ancient British world here, a polytheistic world. He says, gods, 'tis strange that from their colt's neglect my love should kindle to inflamed respect. It's a remarkable speech. In the appearance, in the words, in the perception of France, we encounter a grown-up adult man in Shakespeare, which is a surprisingly rare occurrence. We never see him in the play after this first scene, but he's unforgettable in his capacity to value and love Cordelia, not for wealth and political advantage, but for who she is and what she intrinsically is. I am really struck by his use of the word respect. I think it's a kind of breakthrough word in the culture of the court that Shakespeare has established thus far in the first scene. I think it individualizes Cordelia and reflects France's recognition of her infinite individuality. Blake said, whoever loves is infinite. And it seems to me that in this moment, France perceives that about Cordelia in the fullest possible way. And she's removed in his understanding of her and his perception of her from this system of power and hierarchy that the court is, and he focuses in on her, uniqueness as a human being and as a young woman. Well, Lear isn't moved by France's speeches at all, and rejects them utterly, in fact, and this is what he says. Thou hast her, France. Let her be thine, for we have no such daughter, nor shall ever see that face of hers again. Therefore be gone. This is one king telling another king to get out. Without our grace, our love, our benison. Benison meaning his blessing. Come, noble Burgundy, Lear says. And he and Burgundy, the suitor who has failed because he is completely, in the grasp of his selfhood, they walk off together. Well, I think as we look at that speech from Lear, and we remember he won't see Cordelia again until almost the end of the play, we can invoke the terms of William Blake and say that in this moment for Lear, the selfhood is triumphant. And that's a really horrible thing. He closes ranks with Burgundy against Cordelia in France and everything that this young couple represents. The choice here, in the language of Lear's speech, he articulates as himself, is between Burgundy, and it's his choice of where he is going to ally himself. The choice is between Burgundy and Cordelia's face. And, I think the consequences in Shakespeare's poetic conception embedded in this play, the consequences of Lear's choice are nothing less than apocalyptic. And Lear makes his choice and leaves with Burgundy. And the great storm begins to rumble in the distance. Lear, as we've mentioned, almost fulfills his intention of never seeing Cordelia's face again. He does not see her face until Act 4, Scene 7, which is the last scene of that act. And yet he has gone through extraordinary suffering and madness and exposure to the elements in his own psychic disorder. And somehow he comes out at the end of that, and he has changed. And the relationship, the Lear of Act 4, Scene 7 is a light year from the Lear, the kind of controlling and peremptory Lear of the first scene of the play. It's in Act 4, Scene 7 that we witness what the late poet Ted Hughes has called a change in an individual character, that is, in Lear, that represents the greatest event in Shakespeare's oeuvre, the sum of his complete works. And it seems to me that Hughes is right. Cordelia is now near Dover and reports in Act 4, Scene 4, just before this scene, that Lear is still at large, running across the fields in his madness. He has been seen. And she is going to send 100 troops from the French army now landed in Britain to go try to find him and bring him back to her. Alack, 'tis he, she says. Why, he was met even now, as mad as the vexed sea, singing aloud, crowned with rank fumiter and furrow weeds, with hardocks, hemlock, nettles, cuckoo flowers, darnel, and all the idle weeds that grow in our sustaining corn. Lear has made a crown of weeds for himself in his madness, which in one sense can be taken as his own kind of mockery of his royal pretensions that are so vividly on display in the first scene. Lear is found, and he's treated by the doctor, who's a very impressive character. And he goes into a long sleep. And in Act 4, Scene 7, he is carried on stage in a chair. And he is still asleep, but in his sleep, the rags that he has worn through his ordeal and his madness have been taken off of him, and a kind of simple, fresh garment of clothing has been put on him. The doctor orders music to be played. Lear gradually awakes, sane, but his mind is still clouded by his horrific experience. He does not immediately recognize Cordelia, but believes her to be a human spirit in or from heaven, a soul in bliss, as he says, and bliss in Shakespearean language is a synonym for heaven. Where have I been, he asks. Where am I? Fair daylight. He questions whether he is actually seeing the beauty of the sunlight, the experience of which seems for him a far distant and buried memory. Cordelia says, "Oh, look upon me, sir, and hold your hand in benediction over me." She is asking for his blessing. And it's in this moment that his mind clears enough for him to recognize her. And it's an overwhelming recognition for a very frail and 80 and upward to make. When he recognizes her, he works his way, frail as he is, out of his chair and down onto his knees before her. And for her, this is a kind of inversion of what is proper in family relations. And she says, "You must not kneel." But Lear does not get up. He remains kneeling. And at the end of his really only substantial speech in the scene, he says, "Do not laugh at me," to the people gathered around him. "For as I am a man, I think this lady to be my child, Cordelia." And she says, "So I am," she exclaims, "I am." And he says, "Be your tears wet? Yes, Faith, I pray, weep not. If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause. They have not." To which Cordelia's reply is, "No cause, no cause." When Lear asks about Cordelia's tears, he discovers that they are real, and his perception of them is correct. Because as he speaks this line, "Be your tears wet? Yes, Faith, I pray, weep not." Remember that line. As he speaks this line, what's happening on stage is that she's now kneeling down by him, and he touches her face, and it wets his fingertips with her tears. And I believe he thinks she is crying because seeing him has brought on again the great pain of the wrongs that he has committed against her, and that she might be experiencing more pain on his account is simply unbearable to him. And he will correct this if he can. And when he says, and I think he's thinking about her tears as signifying her pain at seeing him again, he says, if you have poison for me, I will drink it. I think in all of Shakespeare's work, this line is tonally unique. How should we read it? He speaks this line, I think, because he believes wrongly that his death might finally give Cordelia peace. And for Lear, his death is absolutely no price to pay for so enormous consequence for his daughter, the wiping away of her tears. I think his tone is one of calm, the calm that comes with absolute resolution and conviction. Well, Cordelia says no cause, no cause. And it seems to me that Shakespeare is attempting to realize and represent unconditional love here through the medium of drama. As the scene moves to its conclusion, Lear leaves the stage in sublime humility. He says, you must bear with me. He's being supported, he's been lifted up, and he's walking. You must bear with me. Pray you now, forget and forgive. He's talking to everyone there. I am old and foolish. And what we have witnessed in this scene, according to Ted Hughes, is something entirely new in Shakespeare. The king and father who was once capable of tyranny has become, in Hughes' words, quote, an infantile, frail, brainwashed, in the good sense, idiot, savant, the child of his daughter, the transfigured Lear. Well, the only time we hear Lear speak after this, when he's not in extremity, is at the beginning of the last scene, Act 5, Scene 3. And for this reason, I believe we're justified as readers to take words here as the fruit of his regenerated relationship with Cordelia, made possible by the spiritual transformation after great suffering that he manifests in Act 4, Scene 7. Between these scenes, there's the decisive battle between Britain and France. France loses, and Lear and Cordelia are taken captive. And Edmund begins this final scene by ordering them to be taken away to prison. And Cordelia says, shall we not see these daughters and these sisters? And there's something tremendously courageous about that, since she knows they hold life and death over her and her father, and that they can expect nothing but death. But Lear won't have it. And we have this extraordinary speech. No, 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 no. Come, let's away to prison. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. So we'll live and pray and laugh and sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies and hear poor rogues talk of court news. The difference between the prison and the court. Who loses and who wins, who's in, who's out, and take upon us the mystery of things as if we were God's spies, and we'll wear out in a walled prison pacts and sects of great ones who ebb and flow by the moon. Now, some critics have read this speech as pathetic, as a kind of childish fantasy, but in my reading and the reading of others, the speech is not a realistic response to Edmund's order, it's a vision. And it comes entirely out of Lear's regenerate love. It is the sign of his spiritual transformation, the antithesis of his Come Noble Burgundy speech in the first scene. I'm struck by how the first thing he really proposes here is that when Cordelia asks his blessing, he'll kneel down and ask of her forgiveness. It enacts his rejection of any superiority or precedence over her, as well, I think, as his fullest recognition and celebration of her ever renewing and creative humanity. For him, it's the ritual on which the rest of their lives will be based, the generation of their joy. And they will take up the mystery of things as if they were God's spies. And this term, God's spies, has been interpreted in many different ways, none of them for me altogether satisfying. My best reading right now is that they will be capable, because they are able of living together entirely in the spirit of love and communion, of perceiving the divinity in human experience. They will see and gather the light that has dispersed in the world. I recently heard from one of my colleagues about a beautiful Jewish origin story, according to which at the creation there were these vessels full of divine light. And for uncertain reasons, these vessels were broken. And the divine light, which had been gathered together, dispersed and became hidden in the world, in the material world, and in human beings. And I think that what Lear intends here, when he talks about taking upon the mystery of things and says that he and Cordelia will do this, is that they will see and discover and gather the light. Last paragraph. I hope I've made a good case in what seem to be now brief remarks. I hope they've been brief for you, that Shakespeare represents King Lear as a character who undergoes a spiritual transformation. It's a large claim to make, and there are many critics of the play who read it differently. It's very difficult to represent such a transformation, I think, in any artistic form, and perhaps even more difficult for us to achieve as living, breathing human beings. And in the play, it's true that this transformation doesn't change everything for the good. Lear and Cordelia are dead by the end of the scene. We've just considered the scene Lear begins with his extraordinary vision. But even so, a sentimental critic, as William Empson, I think the best Shakespeare critic of the 20th century, wrote that Lear's regeneration, even if it doesn't change the world around him altogether, emerges and endures as a kind of wildflower in human experience. Walt Whitman wrote movingly in one of his poems about what he called retrievements out of the night, out of the dark night of the soul. And I think the realization of love between Lear and Cordelia in this dark play is one of those visions that we can retrieve out of the night. So I really look forward to, and again, I'm very conscious that I've only talked about a particular aspect of a play that is dynamic and big and sprawling and about which many things could be said. But I really would welcome a chance to, converse with you, take questions, take comments and observations, disagreements in the time we have left. Thank you, Nathan.
Well, that's beautiful, Dr. Matheson. Thank you very much. That's an angle and an emphasis on the play that I'm sure most of us have not seen and considered like you have articulated. So I appreciate that. And for those viewing, feel free to submit questions in the Q&A button. But in the meantime, I just want to ask a question to you. What we see in this play are many different elements clashing together, it seems to me. And in the name of nature, for one, we see all kinds of manifestations, whether it be the storm, the thunder, the lightning, the heath, the elements, being exposed to the elements on that barren heath and trying to kind of survive and make some kind of refuge in the face of injustice and suffering. But that kind of representation of nature seems to stand kind of in juxtaposition to something like the heart, or even something like the law. If you look at what Edmund, who's the villain of this play and who actually has pretty interesting monologues in this play.
Oh, he does indeed. Yeah, no, they're very, yeah.
Yeah, he kind of represents a kind of nihilistic force of nature that is amoral, that does not give love its due. How do you track that juxtaposition between nature and love and selfhood and imagination, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I think that I think that Edmund embraces selfhood, but also goes beyond ordinary selfhood into a profoundly criminal pursuit of his own aggrandizement in terms of wealth and status and power. And he says, in that soliloquy with which he opens Act 1, Scene 2, "Thou, nature, art my goddess, to thy law my services are bound." And for him, the law of nature is self-interest. And you pursue your own self-interest at the expense of other people. And you try to cultivate relationships with powerful people that will serve your self-interest. And so there really is, no access of love in Edmund's experience. And I would certainly associate him with a kind of added, criminal intensity, with self-seeking, narcissism, a complete separation from, relationships of genuine love with other human beings. He's simply not interested in that. And I do think that's a great, an important, I think you're identifying, Nathan, a great and important, theme in the play that Edmund represents. He doesn't believe he owes anything to society because society has treated him as illegitimate and said, "You're really not one of us." And he's going to pursue his own self-interest by any means necessary to overcome, the debilities that society has placed upon him. And he's a great example of, that kind of element of selfhood and criminal selfhood in the dialectic that exists in a dialectic in the play, I think, and within individual characters in the play, with the spirit of love and imagination and empathy, and moral care for other people.
So when King Lear transforms himself spiritually, when he goes through the ordeal of nature and he comes out of it, are his better affections, are they prompted by a different kind of nature, do you think, or is it something altogether outside of nature? Can love and can recompense be an outgrowth of a different kind of nature, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's been some great work on nature in the play by critics for some time now. And nature is represented in two different ways in the play. On the one hand, it is Edmund's nature, which is all about self-seeking and putting oneself first, no matter what the cost to other people is involved. Nature is also in some ways generative and a kind of order of growth and of beauty. And so I do think that, part of the massiveness of this play is that there's a kind of, there's a kind of cleaving of the very concept, the very idea of nature and representation of nature in the play between this negative understanding of it and this more positive understanding of it. I think that it's very complicated. I'm not sure what the answer is in terms of identifying all aspects of the mechanisms by which Lear is regenerated. And Shakespeare gives him that potential from the first, though it's not very much in evidence in the early scenes of the play, but it's there. And I think that his after banishing Cordelia and her marriage with France, and they're going to France. I mean, the rest of the play is about the two of them, fighting, even unknowingly, very with great difficulty to come back together. And so I think that Lear is shocked by what Cordelia says, but I think he grows to understand that what he was encountering in her actions and words in that first scene is unconditional love. And I think it's the power of that love that has, which is specifically human, in some sense, part of nature, but not part of nature. That really is the force that enables Lear to become regenerate.
When Cordelia reunites with King Lear at the end, and you mentioned this at least twice, you said that she repeats the refrain, no cause, no cause. Mm-hmm. And I was also wondering if what she could have meant there and represented there is no cost, no cost. In other words, she's not demanding a cost from the man who wronged her. She had a legitimate reason to demand some kind of a recompense. But it's interesting that she's not. Nature would demand a recompense, but she's not. I think that's interesting. Something is profound there, I think.
I would have liked to have talked about that speech a bit more. Maybe we can do it right now. I mean, Lear says, if you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me. For your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause. They have not. And when she says no cause, I think she's saying I do not have a cause to wrong you, nor, going back a line in their speech, do I have a cause not to love you, right? My love for you is not conditional on, what you do in relationship to me. And I think we're really getting at the heart of Shakespeare's, full poetic conception of what human love is. And I think we get it as well in almost the same language that France uses. Love's not love when it's mixed with regards that stand aloof from the entire point. In Shakespeare's 116th sonnet, the speaker says, love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. And I think Shakespeare's understanding of human love, if it is genuine love, is really austere, but also very beautiful. It is not something that you give up or alter within yourself the love you hold for another person, even if that person changes or leaves you, alters in his turn. You go on loving, even if you no longer go on having a relationship. And Shakespeare's, I think, very interested in the value of loving another for the person who has that love for another. And if your love comes to an end, it wasn't love in the first place. In Shakespeare's, I think, immensely powerful vision of what human love is. I mean, Paul said love never comes to an end. And Shakespeare would agree with him.
I was just
Generally,
going to say,
it's not.
that this is a very exacting, kind of demanding standard of love that really can only be matched in like holy scripture kind of thing.
Yes,
It's very
I
amazing.
think that's right. I mean, the 116th sonnet says, or the speaker says in it, love's not time's fool. Love is not the fool of time. Though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come, right? We all get old and we don't look as good at 60 as we might have at 20. But that doesn't mean the love goes away. If it is true love, one continues to experience it for another person, even if that person is no longer in your life for whatever reason. I like what you said, it's a very demanding standard for love and very much at odds, frankly, with, ideas about love in our popular culture and so on, where, after a breakup, you get angry with that person and put them out of your lives. Well, okay, but that's not Shakespearean love in the first place.
Powerful. Are there any other questions from anyone else? I do have one. While you're thinking of a question, I do have one last question / comment, and it's been something that over the years has kind of puzzled me. This play seems to be a play about rupture. So we start out with this, with the state kind of intact. The king is at the head of the realm. He's aging, and so he voluntarily decides to kind of what's the term for it? Not bequeath, but something kind of like that.
Well, it is a kind of abdication.
Yeah.
In the name of his pursuit of, it's very faint, but he's going to kind of get his soul ready for death, right? And just to interject one more thing, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but George Orwell wrote a piece in 1947 in which he says that what Lear is about is incomplete renunciation, right? Lear wants to renounce power and responsibility and cares, meaning anxieties, but he still wants everybody to treat him like a king. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work out that way. And so, in some sense, he's making a kind of confused gesture toward renunciation, which he can't actually make. But then ultimately, in Act 4, Scene 7, in his dialogue with Cordelia, and at the point of their reunion, he does make the complete renunciation of the world. And his speech at the beginning of Act 5, Scene 3 about prison being a place of the greatest possible fulfillment because the two of them who love each other can be there together. And the court stands, it's kind of a pastoral space almost, and the court stands as the opposite of that. And they'll just find all the seeking of power and wealth that goes on in the court just very amusing. They'll laugh at it. And he has renounced it entirely at that point and just before.
It is striking to me that this one small moment in which Lear decides to, withhold the portion from Cordelia and leaving the rest of the territory to the other two daughters, that sets in motion a sort of, this little rupture sets in motion this powerful force of usurpation that kind of swallows up the kingdom eventually and ends in a lot of bloodshed. And it kind of ends, but after that bloodshed, there is some kind of order. But all this could have probably been avoided if he would have been maybe more aware of his daughter and what her true nature was, perhaps.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And there's a whole, and I really appreciate you adding this to the conversation, Nathan. There's a whole rich political dimension to this play that we haven't talked a lot about tonight, because I was talking about a personal relationship between Lear and Cordelia for most of the time. But frankly, after that first scene, the world of the play, the society of the play, as you rightly say, begins to fall apart. And, one of the things we could have talked about tonight is that, what goes on in the play in that respect is very similar to what's happening in our own world, in our own republic, where things seem to be falling apart. And some people are trying to, respond to that by finding, value and values that they can hold on to in the midst of what might well be a deteriorating situation. And in that way, I think the politics of Lear, of the Lear world, reflect or resonate strongly with, what's going on in our own world right now. And I agree with you that Lear blows it in the beginning, in the first scene. And, one of the things that hurries into existence is a kind of political crisis.
It is striking that something as small as, the affections of the heart, those things are actors on the grand geopolitical stage, so to speak.
Good point. And, I think Shakespearean drama is all about that. It's about how the personal, really, in the 70s and 80s, people are saying how well the personal is political, but the personal affects the state political order in Shakespearean drama, and maybe never more so than in the case of the play King Lear.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. This has been a great discussion. I'm just all full of ideas to go back and read this play again. So let's conclude there. Great discussion. Thank you for coming again. Let's do this next year.
Well, I just enjoy this very much whenever I meet with the group. And Nathan, I want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight. And Nathan, I want to thank you again. This is really a rich experience for me whenever I come into the world of books and bridges. So thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye.
Nathan. Bye-bye.